When we think of the 19th century, we often conjure images of a world in flux, the Industrial Revolution reshaping societies, empires expanding, and technology bridging once unfathomable distances. But in the heart of this transformative era lies a story that is as dramatic as it is complex, a story of ambition, exploration, and the clash of cultures that would forever alter the map of a continent. Today, we are going to journey back in time to the scramble for 19th century Africa, a period that saw European powers carve up a continent with breathtaking speed. And at the center of this maelstrom were three men whose names are etched into history: David Livingstone, the missionary-explorer; Morton Stanley, the journalist-adventurer; and Cecil Rhodes, the imperial visionary. Their lives and legacies are inextricably linked to this period, and their actions would not only define their own fates, but also shape the destiny of millions. All of Africa was colonized by foreign powers during the scramble for Africa, except Ethiopia and Liberia. It's worth noting that Russia or China are not interested or are too busy. Major motivations of the Victorian age as they relate to the scramble for Africa. The desire to explore and map the dark continent. Finding the source of the Nile. This was the holy grail of Victorian explorers. To promote imperialism and a desire to civilize non-Europeans. Finally, the religious fervor of the period and the spreading of Christianity. David Livingstone was a medical doctor who trained at Anderson's University in Glasgow and in London. His medical education was varied, including studies in medicine, surgery, chemistry, and theology. He was accepted by the London Missionary Society and trained as a medical missionary with the initial hope of going to China. However, he ended up being sent to Africa, where from 1813 to 1873 he served as a doctor and missionary. David Livingstone's relationship with the Moffat family was deeply intertwined, beginning with his professional admiration for Robert Moffat and culminating in his marriage to the Moffat's daughter, Mary, with whom he has 6 children. 3 children are born in quick succession, and they all join Livingstone crossing the Kalahari twice. Robert Moffat, his inspiration and mentor, was a prominent Scottish missionary with the London Missionary Society who had established the Kuruman mission station in southern Africa. Livingstone was greatly inspired by Moffat's work and his vision for expanding missionary activity further into the continent. When Livingstone was in England, he sought out Moffat and was convinced by him to go to Africa. Mary Moffat. Livingstone's mother-in-law was considered to be a thorn in the side. The relationship with Mary Moffat, Robert's wife, was more contentious. While she respected Livingstone's missionary zeal, she vocally disapproved of his actions as a husband and father. She was deeply concerned for her daughter and grandchildren, whom Livingstone frequently took on dangerous and difficult journeys of exploration, far from the established mission base at Kuruman. The elder Mary Moffat blamed Livingstone for the death of one of their infant children, who died shortly after a difficult desert crossing. Livingstone married Mary Moffat, the daughter of Robert and Mary, in 1845. She was born and raised in Africa and was a skilled linguist, fluent in the Swana language. Her knowledge of local languages and her familiarity with African life made her an invaluable asset to Livingstone. At the time of their marriage, some accounts suggest Livingstone viewed the union as a practical necessity for his missionary work, describing her as a matter-of-fact lady. However, he later grew to love her deeply. Mary endured hardship on expeditions with Livingstone, losing a child shortly after birth and suffering a stroke. At one point, she was sent back to England to educate the children. All in all, they spent only 4 of the 17 years of their marriage together, and those periods were on explorations in their early marriage. What made Livingstone so special? Was it that he had an enormous capacity for endurance of pain? Travel in Africa was difficult due to swamps, deserts, and hostile tribes. Was it his ability to overcome fatigue and deprivation for periods lasting many years? He carefully documented his explorations, and when back in England, wrote books on Africa which piqued foreign interest. Livingstone considered Africa the ideal place for white men to settle, bringing Christianity, commerce, and civilization to Africa. Florence Nightingale declared him the greatest man of his generation. David Livingstone's initial decade in Africa, from his arrival in 1841 to 1851, was a foundational period that shaped his future as a famous explorer. While he is often remembered for his great journeys of discovery, this era was defined by his work as a missionary and his growing realization that to spread Christianity and end the slave trade, he would need to go beyond the established mission stations. He arrived in Cape Town in 1841 and traveled north to the Kuruman mission station, marked by the red arrow on the map. However, Livingstone was soon disappointed by the concentration of missionaries in a single location. He believed that to truly spread the gospel, he needed to move into unoccupied ground. Livingstone set out on his own, establishing a series of mission stations further north. His first was at Mabotsa, in present-day Botswana, where he famously survived a lion attack that left his left arm permanently injured. He later moved to Chonuane and finally to Kolobeng, where he worked with the Bakwena chief Sechele, who by all accounts was his only convert during his entire career. By 1849, Livingstone's frustration with the limitations of his stationary work led him to embark on a more ambitious journey. He was the first European to successfully cross the Kalahari Desert with his family, with the assistance of a British hunter named William Cotton Oswell. David Livingstone began the westward portion of his famous 1853 to 1856 expedition from Linyanti, a village in what is now Namibia. He and his companions, who were primarily from the local Kololo people, traveled west across the continent to reach the Portuguese port of Luanda on the Atlantic coast in present-day Angola. This first leg of the journey was incredibly arduous due to challenging terrain and illness. After resting and recovering in Luanda, he began his return journey, but instead of retracing his steps, he decided to travel east. He followed the Zambezi River. It was during this part of the expedition that he made his most famous discovery, that of the Victoria Falls. On November the 17th, 1855, Livingstone became the first European to witness the immense waterfalls on the Zambezi River. The local people called them Mosi o Atunya, or the smoke that thunders, a name that beautifully describes the mist and sound of the falls. Livingstone, however, named them Victoria Falls, in honor of Queen Victoria. From the falls he continued his journey eastward, eventually reaching the Indian Ocean coast at Quelimane, in present-day Mozambique, in May 1856. This completed his historic transcontinental crossing of Africa. Livingstone's 1858 to 1864 Zambezi expedition was a British government-sponsored journey with ambitious goals, but ultimately ended in disaster. Unlike his first Trans-Africa trek, this expedition was a large-scale, well-equipped undertaking with a scientific and commercial team. Europeans had not previously explored it owing to their susceptibility to malaria, dysentery, and sleeping sickness, which was prevalent in the interior. The route prevented use of draft animals, oxen and horses. The route turned out to be impassable to boats past the Cahora Bassa Rapids that Livingstone had failed to explore on his earlier travels. Livingstone's leadership style and personality clashes with his team members created a toxic environment. The expedition included his brother Charles Livingstone, a number of scientists, and a naval officer. Constant arguments, a lack of teamwork, and Livingstone's stubbornness led to resignations and strained relationships. 1862, Mary joined her husband on the Zambezi. He was still trying to prove the river was navigable from the Indian Ocean. The expedition was marked by personal tragedies, including the death of Livingstone's wife, Mary Moffat Livingstone, from fever in 1862. This deeply affected Livingstone and further contributed to the expedition's decline. During 1864, the UK government ordered the recall of the expedition due to increasing costs and failure to find a navigable route. The quest for the source of the Nile was also in full swing during the period of Livingstone's Zambezi expedition. Since 460 BC, when the ancient Greek Herodotus, the father of history, failed to discover it after traveling 600 miles inland from Cairo, the source has remained an elusive mystery. Several other explorers attempted to locate the source of the Nile. The route taken by Burton and Speke is indicated on the map by red dashes. Likewise, the Speke and Grant expedition is indicated with purple dashes. John Hanning Speke identified either Lake Albert or Lake Victoria as the source. However, there was still serious debate on the matter. Livingstone believed the source lay much farther south, and that Lake Victoria and Tanganyika are part of a chain of rivers and lakes that form the Nile. David Livingstone's final expedition from 1866 to 1873 was a quest to find the source of the Nile River. It was a grueling and ultimately unsuccessful journey that cemented his legacy as a renowned explorer and a staunch opponent of the slave trade. After his disastrous 1858 to 1864 Zambezi expedition, he seeks to redeem himself by settling the question once and for all. Livingstone returned to Africa, this time to Zanzibar, and from there he set out to seek the source of the Nile. He believed that the source was farther south and connected by the lakes of African Rift Zone. He began the expedition in 1866, landing in Zanzibar on the east coast of Africa with a party of about 30 African companions. His plan was to travel through the region south of Lake Tanganyika, where he believed the Nile's source would be found. The journey was fraught with difficulties. He was plagued by illness, including malaria and dysentery, which weakened him considerably. He also faced supply issues as some of his men deserted him and stole his provisions. He became increasingly confused about the geography of the area, at one point mistakenly believing the Lualaba River was the Nile's source, whereas it is actually a tributary of the Congo River. Our intrepid explorer gets to Lake Malawi June 19, 1866. Exploring Lake Malawi is the first vital step in proving that the lakes and rivers are, in fact, part of the Nile. By now, most of his supplies had been stolen, including all his medicines. He and most of the remaining party are sick. Livingstone's travels led him to Lake Mweru and Lake Bangweolu in his quest to find the source of the Nile. He was the first European to document and survey these bodies of water. His discovery and subsequent charting of Lake Mweru, along with the Luapula River that flows into it, were crucial in his developing theory of the region's hydrography. He speculated that the Lualaba River, which flows from the lake, was the true source of the Nile, a theory that was later proven incorrect but which drove his continued exploration. Battling a fever and unable to continue on alone, Livingstone joins a caravan of Arab slave traders. He plans to travel with the slavers to Ujiji, where he can resupply and continue his search without the hated slavers. Now it's March 14th, 1869, and after battling disease and utter despair, a broken and emaciated Livingstone has reached Lake Tanganyika and Ujiji. At Ujiji, he was meant to receive a resupply of goods from the coast, but he was dismayed to find that the men who were supposed to deliver them had either stolen them or sold them off for profit. He was left with very little, which severely hampered his ability to continue his exploration. All of his medicine, food, mail, and clothing, vital for trading with natives, have been plundered. With no means to travel or acquire new supplies, Livingstone was effectively stranded in Ujiji. He was dependent on the hospitality of the local Arab traders, many of whom were involved in the slave trade he so abhorred. This period was one of forced inactivity and despair for the explorer. By 1869, rumors spread that Livingstone had died, since no one received contact from him for 3 years after he set out on his source of the Nile exploration in 1866. The man who 15 years earlier traversed Africa, marching hundreds of miles in a month, was now unable to shuffle more than a few painful steps. Walking through thick mud had given him horrific ulcers on his feet, which ate through muscle, tendon, and bone. At night they throbbed painfully, denying him sleep. Let's turn our attention now to Sir Henry Morton Stanley, born out of wedlock in Denbigh, Wales, as John Rowlands, and was abandoned by his mother and spent his early years in a workhouse. At age 18, he worked his way to the United States as a cabin boy. In New Orleans, he was supposedly befriended by a wealthy merchant named Henry Hope Stanley, whose name he adopted. This claim is now believed to have been a fabrication, but he consistently represented himself as an American. He was an explorer, journalist, soldier, and politician. He is most famous for his expeditions in Central Africa, particularly his search for the missing missionary and explorer David Livingstone. Henry Morton Stanley was a journalist for the New York Herald. In 1869, Stanley received a roving commission in the Middle East, which was to include the relief of Dr. David Livingstone, not heard from since his departure for Africa in 1866. Joining him are his African guide, the former slave Sidi Mubarak Bombay, and a former British sailor, William Shaw, along with porters carrying hundreds of pounds of supplies. Stanley's journey to Ujiji was a grueling and ambitious expedition launched to find the renowned Scottish explorer and missionary David Livingstone. Livingstone, who was a popular hero in Victorian Britain, had been in Central Africa for several years now with little or no contact with the outside world, leading to widespread concern about his fate. In 1869, the publisher of the New York Herald, James Gordon Bennett, Jr., gave Stanley, a young and ambitious journalist, a simple but daunting directive: find Livingstone. Stanley was given a generous budget and tasked with leading an expedition into the heart of Africa. He landed in Zanzibar in early 1871 and began assembling a massive caravan. The expedition was one of the largest of its time, consisting of approximately 200 men, including porters, guides, and soldiers. Stanley's thoroughness in preparing for the journey was notable. He acquired provisions, currency, and even pack animals to transport supplies. Tropical illnesses like dysentery and malaria ravaged the caravan. Stanley himself suffered from several bouts of fever. They traversed a variety of difficult landscapes, including dense jungles, swamplands, and rocky hills. The journey was physically demanding for all involved. Many of the porters deserted or died from disease and exhaustion. The expedition's pack animals also succumbed to the harsh conditions and diseases, such as those spread by tsetse flies. Stanley's methods were often brutal. He was known for his firm, sometimes violent discipline, and his readiness to engage in armed conflict with hostile local tribes. This reputation earned him the nickname Bula Matari, or Breaker of Rocks. On November 10, 1871, as Stanley's caravan marched into Ujiji flying the American flag, a crowd of villagers gathered. Stanley spotted an elderly, gaunt white man with a gray beard and dressed in European clothing. He approached him, and in one of the most famous moments in exploration history, allegedly greeted him with the now legendary phrase, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" Livingstone, who was at the time ill and low on supplies, gratefully accepted Stanley's help. Stanley provided him with medicine, food, and other much-needed supplies, getting him back to health. Stanley and Livingstone spent several months together, during which they explored the northern end of Lake Tanganyika, confirming that it was not connected to the Nile River. Stanley tries to convince Livingstone to leave Africa, but Livingstone refuses, and the men part ways. Stanley returns to Zanzibar and becomes a world-famous African explorer. His trek to Ujiji and his discovery of Livingstone made him an international celebrity. He published a best-selling book about his journey, How I Found Livingstone, which cemented his reputation as an explorer, though his account also drew criticism for its self-aggrandizing tone and the ruthless methods he described. The trek not only secured Stanley's fame, but also brought Livingstone back into the public eye, allowing him to continue his work in Africa until his death just a few years later. The Stanley and Livingstone story was too good for Hollywood to ignore. Livingstone continued his work in Africa until his death in 1873. David Livingstone died on May 1, 1873, in Chief Chitambo's village, located in what is now modern-day Zambia. He was 60 years old and had been suffering from a variety of illnesses for years. Livingstone's health had been in severe decline, and the exact cause of his death is believed to be a combination of several factors, namely malaria and dysentery, and internal hemorrhaging that some sources suggest he also suffered from severe bleeding hemorrhoids, which contributed to his death. On the morning of his death, his loyal companions and attendants, Susie and Chuma, found him kneeling by his bedside as if in prayer. He was too weak to walk and was being carried in a litter in his final days. In a testament to their loyalty, Livingstone's African attendants, Susie and Chuma, took on the incredible task of preserving his body and transporting it to the coast. They performed a rudimentary embalming of his body. They removed his heart and viscera and buried them under a large mpundu tree, believing his heart belonged to Africa. The spot is now marked by a memorial. They then wrapped his body in bark and sailcloth and carried it on a long and dangerous journey of over 1,000 miles to the coastal town of Bagamoyo in modern-day Tanzania. This trek took them 9 months, and they faced many dangers, including hostile tribes and the constant threat of being attacked by slave traders. From Bagamoyo, his body was transported by ship to Britain, arriving to a hero's welcome. After his body was verified through a comparison of a healed broken arm, a feature he was known for, David Livingstone was given a funeral with full honours. He was laid to rest at Westminster Abbey in London in 1874, a final tribute to one of Britain's most celebrated explorers and missionaries. His resting place in Westminster Abbey is marked by an inscription that reads, "Brought by faithful hands over land and sea, here rests David Livingstone, missionary, traveler, philanthropist." Following his success in finding David Livingstone, Henry Morton Stanley returned to Africa in 1874 to lead one of the most ambitious and transformative expeditions of the era. This journey, which lasted until 1877, was a joint venture funded by the New York Herald and the London Daily Telegraph. Its primary objective was to solve the remaining geographical mysteries of Central Africa, a mission that Livingstone himself had been unable to complete. Stanley spent months circumnavigating the lake, a monumental task that confirmed its vast size and its single outlet, the Ripon Falls. Now proven that Speke had been right all along, and that the Nile flowed from Lake Victoria via Ripon Falls and Murchison Falls to Lake Albert, and from there to Juba to its mouth in Mediterranean. This journey also brought him into contact with King Mutesa of Buganda, a powerful ruler with whom Stanley established a relationship, paving the way for Christian missions in the region. Stanley traced Livingstone's Lualaba River. This was the most brutal and historically significant part of the journey. In November 1876, Stanley and his remaining crew began to follow the Lualaba River. The journey was fraught with extreme danger. They had to navigate a series of treacherous rapids and waterfalls, including the powerful Boyoma Falls, which he named Stanley Falls. The expedition also faced hostile tribes, disease, starvation, and the constant threat of attack. Stanley's Bula Matari, so breaker of rocks reputation, was solidified during this period as he used dynamite and sheer force to clear obstacles and overcome resistance. After 999 days and thousands of miles, Stanley and his 11 surviving companions reached the Atlantic Ocean at the mouth of the Congo River in August 1877. Having proven that the Lualaba was, in fact, the headwaters of the Congo. Enter King Leopold II of Belgium, full name Leopold Louis-Philippe Marie Victor, reigning from 1865 to 1909. While he's known in Belgium as the Builder King for his architectural projects, he's more widely remembered as the founder and sole owner of the Congo Free State, a brutal personal colony in Central Africa. His rule there was characterized by systematic atrocities and mass killings, all for the purpose of personal profit from rubber and ivory. Henry Morton Stanley had a crucial and controversial relationship with King Leopold II of Belgium. After his Trans-African expedition in 1877, Stanley returned to Europe and tried, without success, to convince the British government to colonize the Congo region. Seeing an opportunity, King Leopold II of Belgium, who had a personal ambition to acquire a colony, hired Stanley. From 1879 to 1884, Stanley worked as Leopold's agent, leading expeditions to open up the Congo for what was publicly presented as a humanitarian and scientific mission. In reality, the goal was to secure the territory for Leopold's private ownership. Stanley's work involved establishing a network of trading posts and a transportation system and negotiating treaties with local chiefs. Stanley's work for Leopold II played a direct and instrumental role in establishing one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history. While Stanley himself wasn't directly implicated in the widespread atrocities that followed, his actions laid the groundwork for the exploitation of the Congo's resources, particularly rubber and ivory. Under Leopold's rule, forced labor, violence, and systematic mutilation led to the deaths of millions of Congolese people. Stanley's legacy is forever tied to this period. His initial fame as an explorer became tarnished by his association with Leopold and the horrific events that unfolded in the Congo Free State, which was a personal fiefdom run for the king's profit. Let's now look at Stanley's later life. After his expeditions and work for King Leopold II, Henry Morton Stanley's life took a different turn. He settled in England, a public figure of both renown and controversy. In 1887, Stanley embarked on his last major African expedition, the Emin Pasha Relief Expedition. The goal was to rescue Emin Pasha, the governor of the Egyptian province of Equatoria in modern-day Sudan, who had been cut off from communication by the Mahdist War. The expedition was one of Stanley's most brutal, plagued by disease, starvation, and conflict. Although he eventually found Emin Pasha and escorted him out of the region, the expedition was widely criticized for its high human cost and Stanley's ruthless leadership. Upon his return to England in 1890, Stanley was a global celebrity. That same year, at the age of 49, he married Dorothy Dolly Tennant, a prominent British artist. Their marriage helped Stanley establish himself in English high society, a stark contrast to his humble and turbulent beginnings. At his wife's urging, Stanley entered politics. He became a naturalized British citizen in 1892 and was elected to the House of Commons as a Liberal Unionist for the constituency of North Lambeth in 1895. However, his political career was not a great success. He found parliamentary life tedious and was not a particularly effective speaker. He served only one term, from 1895 to 1900, before retiring from politics. In 1899, in recognition of his service to the British Empire, he was made a Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath, officially becoming Sir Henry Morton Stanley. In his final years, Stanley suffered from ill health, including bouts of malaria and other tropical illnesses he had contracted in Africa. He died at his home in London on May 10, 1904, at the age of 63. Stanley had wished to be buried next to David Livingstone in Westminster Abbey. However, the Dean of Westminster denied his request, reportedly due to Stanley's controversial reputation and the accusations of brutality and blood on his hands. As a result, he was buried in the churchyard of St. Michael and All Angels in Pirbright, Surrey. His grave is marked by a large granite stone inscribed with the words Henry Morton Stanley, Bula Matari, 1841 to 1904, Africa. Bula Matari was his nickname among the Congolese, meaning breaker of rocks, a testament to his forceful and relentless nature. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. Part 2 of the Scramble for Africa will concentrate on South Africa and the life of Cecil Rhodes. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel by pressing the subscribe and like buttons below. We are planning to add many more presentations covering a wide variety of science, history, and other enriching subjects. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to make them, and we will do our best to respond. Again, thanks for watching, and please do subscribe.